Hey, what's up everybody? Today we will learn how to use block to manage state in a Flutter application. Block stands for Business Logic Component. If you want to use block in your Flutter application, you can divide your application architecture into 3 layers. The first layer is the view or presentation. The second layer is the block that will handle the business logic or the logic that defines your application, and the third layer is the data layer. So it may be save data in your device offline, or it can connect to any backend server over API to retrieve data. So basically block is the middle position from the view to data layer. There are some concepts to remember if you want to use block in your Flutter application. The first concept is event. Basically it is similar like action in Redux. So events are the input of a block, and it basically pass an instruction that what we need to do. The second concept you have to remember is state. If you use stateful widget or Redux or provider, you already know that what is state in an application. So basically in a block, when you pass a event, it will give an output of state based on that event after processing the event. When you define your own block, you must have to extend your block to the main block class from the block package. Similar to Redux, every block must have to define an initial state. Every block must have to define the map event to state method, so that when you pass an event in a block, it triggers the map event to state method and it returns a stream of state. So that means if you want to use block in your Flutter application, you must have the knowledge of stream and generator in Dart programming language. Every block has a dispatch method. If you want to pass an event to a block, you can use this dispatch method, which triggers the map event to state method, and that will produce the state as a stream. So let's start the coding.
So like our previous tutorials where we demonstrated Redux and provider to manage states in Flutter application, this time we also use the same application. So you will see this interface where in the settings there you can change the font size. Also you can tick the bold or italic option, and if you do that you can see the output in here. Right now this is not done. We will be doing this in this scenario using the block state management library. And for this project you can find this sample code in my GitHub repository. Just visit github.com/mahmoodhasan/thingdiff. Here go to Flutter and then go to small demo, then go to states_block, and here you will see two different project. One is states_block finished, where the block pattern is totally implemented, and the other is the states_block starter. So here there is no block implemented, so you should download this code base and start writing code with me. So in our project we need to install the block library. So if you visit pub.dev and search block, you will get two library, block and Flutter block. So just open these two library because we need to implement these libraries in our application, and come here the installing part. So then copy these dependencies and go to your Android Studio and paste it under this Flutter lorem, and then also copy the Flutter block, this library, copy this dependency and paste it under the block, and after saving this just click packages get. Also close the application, because after installing any library you should redevelop the application to test. In Android Studio we also need to add a plugin which is not essential but which helps to make the block faster. So just click this Android Studio preferences and go to plugins and search here block. and you will see there is a block code generator. Just install it. It is already installed in my Android Studio. So now we need to create the block. So to do that, in the leave directory, I will right click and then go to new, and then here you will see that after installing that block library in the plugin, Android Studio plugin, you will see this menu, Flutter Bloc. If you did not install that plugin, you cannot see this this option. So you can also create the files manually, but it's preferable to use this Flutter Bloc plugin to speed up the thing. So just click here, and here I want to give the name of this block is settings, and here it is said that the name should be camel K. So that means settings should be capital S, and I click OK. And here you will see that there is a settings directory is created where there are 3 files generated: settings underscore block, settings underscore event, and settings underscore state. So let's open this event, settings underscore event dart file. Here you are seeing that there is at immutable and abstract class setting event is created, and at the top you are going to see that part of settings underscore block dart. So if you never saw this part of, basically these are keyword, built-in keyword in Dart programming language and in Flutter framework. So if you open this settings underscore block, you will see that here all the necessary files are imported, like the block and the meta, and settings block class is created, and that extends the block, the main class. And here you will see that there is two part settings underscore event dart and settings underscore state dart. So settings block is the main file where it is mentioning that the part of this file is defined in separated file. That's why they are using a part keyword in here to mention that separated code in here. So, and the other separated file, you will see the part of the main file, that is settings underscore block. So at first we want to implement this settings underscore event. So here it is a abstract class, so and it is immutable. So in our settings event, if you run this application again, you will see this in our settings event we need some data. So one is the font size, one is the if the user press the bold or not, and if the user tick on the italic or not. So that's why we want to define some variables or properties in this abstract class. So just see this settings page, and here you will see that we need 3 data. So let's define the properties in here. And in this abstract class, I want to use the payload as a final, and which will be a dynamic. So the data will be defined at the runtime. So when any other class will extend this abstract class, that class must have to pay the payload data, so that this constructor assign that data to here. So let's define our first event. So here I created a class font size for this slider thing basically. So this class extends this settings event, and when I will create an instance of this class, I will pass a double value. So that is the slider. When you move the slider, you will see that a value is generated. We will pass this value by this instance, and this instance when created, it will pass that to the super class. So that means the settings event class. So that data will be stored in the payload. So let's create other 2 events, bold and italic. So all our 3 events are created. So we will use these events in our block. Now let's move on the settings underscore state. So here we will define initial state, and when our block will create a new state, we will write the code in here that how the state will generate it. So here initially there are the block plugin created some code. So there is that at immutable abstract class setting state. So let's define some properties in here. So I defined three properties: slider font size, which is a double, type is bold is a boolean type, is italic is another boolean type. So let's create an constructor. So here I have been using this named constructor, which is by default optional. So that means when a setting state is created, any of these value can be provided or no value will be provided, because these are optional. Also I want to define a getter method. So basically when you move this slider, the value basically generated from 0.0 to 1.0, but we need a font size from 15 to font size of 30. That's why we have defined this getter method, that font size, and based on that value, double value, if we multiply that by 30, we'll get the value from 15 to 30. So here you are seeing that an initial setting state class is defined, which is extended in this settings state class. So let's populate some code in here. So I want to define a default constructor for this class. And initial setting state basically when your block created the first state before any event inputted in the block or creating any state, that will be the initial state. So in this case I want to pass, as this state is extending this setting state, so I want to pass some initial value. So for that I want to pass slider font size is 0.5, is bold is false, and is italic is false. So our initial setting state code is done. Now when we need to create a new state, so let's create a class for that. So I have created a class new settings state, which is extending this setting state class. So in this case I am not defining any default constructor, rather I am defining a named constructor, and which will help us to create a new state based on old state, and also we can pass any value to populate in the new state. So let's define the named constructor. So our name constructor name will be from old setting state, where we will pass one old state and some values like slider font size is bold and is italic. So our name constructor is done. So basically when we will create any instance from for this new setting state, we will be using this from old setting state name constructor, where we will pass the old state, and if we want to create a new instance, new state based on some new value, suppose we want to pass only the slider font size value, we can pass that value in here, because this is a named parameter, so that any by default any of this value can be optional. And also when we receive those values, we will pass those value in the using the super to the setting state. And here is the thing that, so in our super class there are three variable, right, or three properties, slider font size is bold is italic. So what we all will do, that when we are creating a new setting state, we will check that if the slider font size value is provided or not. If the value is provided, we will use that, and we are using this null aware operator in Dart programming language. But if the value is absent, we will use the all state slider font size value. Similar things will be happen for is bold and is italic. So our setting state is done. Now move on to the settings underscore block code. So here we will write our main logic or business logic. As we are using this block plugin, we already got some code like settings block, which is extends this block base class, where there is a two types, settings event as input and setting state as output. So this is how block works. You will give an event as input and you will get an state as output, and you are defining this using this angle bracket, that what type of event this block will receive and what type of state it will produce. So here this stream, we are getting map event to state, so we will define this method here. So just remove this comment, and here you see that this map event to state, what it will do, it will take the event as, and it will produce a state and return as a stream. And here we are using the Dart generator pattern, that's why you are seeing this async star. Okay, so let's write the code. If event is font size, then what we want to do, we want to yield the new setting state from old setting state. So we want to create a new state. So new setting state we define in here, right? New setting state, and we are using this from old setting state, that means this name constructor, and where we want to pass the current state. So in the block, if you want to know the current state, you just use the current state keyword. It will automatically get the current state, because that is defined in this block base class. And now here I want to pass the value slider font size event dot payload. So that means if we pass a event, that is basically a font size event, and we pass the value, and that value will be get by using event dot payload. If you get this settings underscore event, you will see that there is a payload. So then we will create a new instance, pass the current state and the event, and we will yield this data. So that means EL is used in the generator, so that this data, this state will create and used as a return as a stream. Now write some other else if logic. I can just copy this code for the other part, and here instead of slider font size, it will be is bold event dot payload. Similarly, I just copy this thing. Here is italic and is italic event dot payload. So our block is done. Now let's move on to our main.dart file. So at first I want to import some files. So first I want to import Flutter Bloc library. Import Flutter Bloc.dart. Then I want to import our if I check the pub space YML, our project name is states underscore block. So I copy this thing and come our main.dart file. So I will type package colon states block, then it will be settings, then it will be settings dot underscore block dot dart, where we define our block. Now in the main function, let's redefine this main function using the curly braces. So at first I want to create an instance of block provider. So let's define a variable final block provider. So basically block provider, using that you can pass the block to the widget, and here what type of state, what type of block we want to use, that will be mentioned in the angle bracket. So we want to use this settings settings block, which we define in here, settings block. You see, settings block. The instance name is block provider. So block provider, again settings block, and here in the when you create an instance of this block provider, you have to pass two property. One is the builder method. So here you can get the context, but I do not need the context, that's why I use this underscore, and this builder method will return an instance of settings block. And then there is a child, and in the child I want to use the my app, the root widget. So block provider is done, and at the last line I want to run the app, and here the widget will be block provider. So our main.dart is done. We using this block provider widget, we are creating an instance of the settings block, and then we are passing this in the root child. And now our root child is block provider, which has a child is my app, so that all the widget under this my app can access the block. Now let's go to our settings page. So in the settings page we were using the built-in stateful widget, so we no longer need that. That's why we remove all this code here, and here we want to use stateless widget, so the error will be gone. And now at the bottom we also do not need this function in get font size, because we define this in the settings state, or yes, this getter is defined in here, so we no longer need that on the settings page. Now let's import some library like here. So I go to the main function, main.dart file, and copy these two library path here and paste it in here, Flutter Bloc and settings block. Now in the widget build, let's create an instance of settings block, final settings block. So what we want to do, we want to use the block provider dot off method. So block provider dot off method, and where we are using passing this context, and before this parenthesis in the angle bracket we want to pass settings block. So in this settings widget, what it will do, it will using this block provider dot off method, and from the context, from the widget tree, it will look for the settings block. So when it will found the settings block from the top level widget, it will return this block from here, so that the block provider, using this block provider we are passing this settings block, right? So we will access this setting block from here using this block provider dot off method. But remember, you must use this angle bracket and the block type. So here I am passing settings block, otherwise this will be a false. That means this settings block will be null. Now let's rewrite some code. So here in the font size, get font size, where we want to change the font size, right? So to do that we need to use the block builder stream method. Okay, so here in the body, instead of column I will click alter enter and wrap with a new widget. Here I will use the block builder widget, and block builder widget has some property, and before implementing that property in the angle bracket you want to define that what type of block and what type of state you are expecting. So here I am passing settings block as the first parameter and settings state as the output. Okay, so if you just move your cursor in the block builder and click Ctrl J, you will see the documentation that in the block builder it is showing settings block and setting state and what these are doing. And and block builder basically handles building a widget in response to a new state. Okay, so this is the documentation. And here in the parameter, I want to use or define a builder method. It's very important to define this thing, and in the builder method you have to pass the context and you will pass the state. Okay, and here in the curly braces you will use the code. So here I want to remove this child part, and I cut this column thing. Here I need to pass another parenthesis, and here I will use the return statement, and it's okay. If I save this, there is no issue. Okay, in the $get font size, remove this thing and use the state. And you see that in the builder method we are using the first parameter is the context and second parameter is the what is the name of this state. So here I am giving state, so we can get the value or access the value of the state using this state variable. If you use different name here, you have to use the different name in here as well. So state, then here will be font size, and also use to int method to remove the double part. Here in the slider value underscore value, it will be state dot slider font size, the value, and remove this set state thing. We no longer need this set state. So when on change thing happen, that means when the on slider will change the value, then what we want to do, we want to use a method that settings block dot dispatch. So setting block dot dispatch, and we want to pass an event. So we define all our event in here, right? That font size, bold and italic. So here we want to use the font size event. So font size, and we want to pass the data. So the data is the new value, that is the payload. So we'll just copy this thing because we need to use this thing in another two places. So is bold is same, use state dot is bold, and instead of set state use settings block dispatch. Font size, instead of font size use bold, and here the new val, so pass this new val data. Also here state dot is bold, similarly state dot is italic, and remove this set state and use settings block dispatch. Here italic, new val, and here is states dot is italic state, sorry. So it's done. So I rerun this application at this point to see that if it's working correctly or not. So if I go to the settings page and if I move the cursor, it's working, bold is also working, italic is also working. So our setting page is done. So let's move to the home.dart file. So at first import the libraries and then use the block builder. So here I want to use option enter, wrap with a new widget that will be a block builder, where you have to use to type that we want to use the settings block at the first as input, and the output will be setting state. And let's define the builder method, where you will get two parameter context, and using state we want to access this state. And now use this container part, this thing, remove this child and use the return statement inside here and use semicolon. So now the font size, here we want to use font size will be state dot font size. We also want to add some other property for the bold and the italic. So here we want to use font weight, that if state dot is bold, then font weight will be bold, otherwise font weight will be normal. Similarly, font style will be, if state dot is italic is true, then font style will be italic, otherwise font style will be normal. Let's save this thing. We run this application to see that what's happening. So now I go to setting page again and change the font size to 30. Also click bold and italic and come to the home page. You see now bold and italic is working. So let's move on to our about page, and let's copy this two line again. In the about page, let's import this code. So our about page is also done. If I come to our about section, you see it's not working. So come to the settings and rerun this application. And in the settings page, let's move to the font 28 and only italic, and come here in the about page. You see font is now 28 and it's become italic. Home is also working. Let's come to the settings again and move the font size 23 and click bold again, and come to the home and come to italic about page. It's working. So this is how we can implement block state management library in a Flutter application.
So I hope that you understand how this block works, the concept and the coding. And if you want to ask me that which state management library you should use, this is basically totally based on you, that which one you like. For simple application, you can use stateful widget, or you can mix with stateful widget with any third-party library like Provider or Redux or Block. But for me, if I want to develop any medium level application, then I most probably use Block architecture and Block state management library in my application with the stateful widget. For simple thing, I don't think that you have to use the Block for whole state management in your application. For many cases, you can use just simple stateful widget. But in some cases like authentication, data retrieve, this kind of thing, it's better to use Block or Redux in the state management library. So thank you for watching and keep learning.